Many stories seek to reveal a larger truth, and do so following the journey of protagonists. The reader evolves vicariously through the struggles of those in the story. However, it's very interesting when characters remain unaware of details known only to the reader. Those within the text experience less understanding of the world than eyes on the page. The reader left to wonder what in the real world they are unaware of. How has their perspective been defined by things they don't know? One such story is James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. It opens with the passage, "Everyone had always said that John would be a preacher when he grew up, just like his father. It had been said so often, John, without ever thinking about it, had come to believe it himself. Not until the morning of his 14th birthday did he really begin to think about it, and by then, it was already too late." It's an excellent hook. Not only is the drama ahead set up in one simple paragraph, the reader is already unwittingly ensnared by a falsehood. The hook pulling us forward to find out why it's too late for John will drag the reader through the broken glass of the Grimes family. From here on out, I'll give as much of the plot as possible without giving away too many spoilers. Many of the revelations about certain characters hit best when they come out of nowhere. Also, we don't need every plot point to express what's great about this multitude of twists. Go Tell It on the Mountain is the story of John Grimes on his 14th birthday, as a spiritual awakening overtakes him. For a variety of reasons, it's something he simultaneously looks forward to and dreads, partly because embracing Christ seems to first require supplicating to his tyrannical, abusive stepfather, Gabriel. At a point in his life when John feels the desire to break free, spiritual beliefs are calling him to a life of submission. And did you catch what I said a moment ago? I referred to Gabriel as his stepfather, not his father. See, this is the first of many revelations throughout the book which the reader becomes aware of, but protagonist John does not. He doesn't know Gabriel is his stepfather, so when people say he'll grow up to be a preacher just like him, he's unaware he's charting the course of his life based on something untrue. The details of his family life, under Gabriel's thumb, as well as being African-American in Harlem circa 1930, are told with a sort of biblical poetry. Anyone familiar with the Bible will recognize paraphrased passages and a stylization reminiscent of Christian scripture. For instance, when John realizes he can't, quote, bow before the throne of grace without first kneeling to his father, end quote. This mirrors a multitude of Bible verses, especially Hebrews 4:16. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find the grace to help us in our time of need. Furthermore, many of the trials and tribulations the Grimes family endures parallel stories in Scripture. That said, their metaphorical connections are never forced. Rather, they come across as someone, let's say John, recognizing similarities between his family and people in the Bible. However, the limits of John's perspective are revealed through flashbacks as the reader is made aware of details in various characters' lives which John knows nothing about. The book is semi-autobiographical. In fact, the connection between fiction and James Baldwin's life can be seen clearly in his New Yorker article, Letter from a Region in My Mind. The parallels between 14-year-old John Grimes and James Baldwin are unmistakable. A spiritual awakening painfully complicated by puberty, then worsened by an awareness of the world that could no longer ignore things like inequality, sexual desire, racism, and the various seemingly easy, secular means of escaping the existential dread, ennui, and exasperating aspects of existence. As Baldwin wrote in Letter from a Region, my friends began to care less about the way they looked, the way they dressed, the things they did. Presently one found them in a hallway, sharing a jug of wine or a bottle of whiskey, talking, cursing, fighting, sometimes weeping, lost and unable to say what it was that oppressed them, except that they knew it was the man, the white man. Such observations by Go Tell It's protagonist John are spread throughout the novel. However, the crushing influence of oppression, while prevalent in his life, is not something he's entirely aware of. Though John understands racism exists, at one point it steers him from shopping in a predominantly white neighborhood, reasonably fearful of how white people will treat him, John is unaware of how the prevailing culture of racism has shaped his family. This is the knee-capping beauty of Go Tell It on the Mountain. It presents a character like Gabriel Grimes as a cruel and abusive man, because he is, so the reader at first despises him. Then it reveals the way his past, especially the horrors of racism, have warped him into an angry, bitter person. It doesn't necessarily excuse his awful qualities, but it explains them in a way that elicits a certain degree of forgiveness. One can't help wondering what kind of person Gabriel might have become if not for the toxic atmosphere of racism, violence, abuse, and oppression polluting his whole life. It also makes one worry about the future of John Grimes. However, unaware of these details, John only knows him, Gabriel, as a fire and brimstone Old Testament glory to the wrath of God preacher. It's further revealed other family secrets influence the various relationships in the novel. Yet knowing nothing about the grim history of the Grimes, John can only formulate conclusions based on his experiences. This speaks to any attempt to understand another person. Without knowing all the details of their life, any portrait is incomplete, though that never seems to stop others from presuming to know the entirety of a person's character, such presumptions trapping individuals in an existential hell defined by the perceptions of others. John only knows Gabriel's anger, not its origin, so has difficulty looking upon it with any sort of kindness or potential forgiveness. This negatively affects their relationship, because John can only ever hate his stepfather, a feeling at odds with his spiritual aspirations. He wants to love and forgive, but can't because he doesn't know what the reader does. Racism in Go Tell It on the Mountain is often subtle, though no less horrific and haunting. The character Deborah is gang-raped by a group of white men simply because they can. When living in the South, the threat of lynching dictates how Gabriel goes home at night. Richard, John's biological father, kills himself after being arrested for a crime he didn't commit, the anxiety induced by the event chasing him into an early grave. Much of the reckless abandon in certain characters is the consequence of living in a racially restricted world. Nothing they do will ever set them free, and the promise of religion feels hollow, so why not live life to the fullest extent they can? Drink, fuck, fight, and cry now. None of this is presented in preachy text. It is revealed in an unsettlingly casual manner, the way someone might express the details of everyday existence. Racism, its consequences and influences, are so ingrained in their everyday lives that characters in Go Tell It on the Mountain rarely seem to consider any alternative. This is the world they live in, that we live in, and the way it constricts them has taught them to breathe shallow instead of deep, assuming they can breathe at all. That's an element of the whole novel, layers upon layers of oppression, each pushing down, crushing whatever lies at the center. In this instance, John Grimes, who, from his limited understanding of the world, believes submission to a higher power will save him. It's an innocent, almost sweetly naive notion. Of course, not everything in the book is bleak. The end, though ambiguous, is only potentially tragic from a cynical perspective. One can imagine John Grimes finding peace through his spiritual pursuits. After all, the story concludes with him having the come-to-Jesus moment he so desperately wants. Granted, since the novel is semi-autobiographical, one is tempted to conclude that where James Baldwin's life went, so did John Grimes. Baldwin, who experienced a similar spiritual awakening, eventually grew away from it about 3 years later. His life experiences erased whatever naivety he shared with the fictional John. However, since he never turned away from reality, waiting for reward in the afterlife, as religion encourages one to do, Baldwin turned his incredible intellect towards revealing some uncomfortable truths about the world. His essay on being white and other lies in Essence magazine circa 1984 contains a scathing yet honest appraisal of white identity, that it is essentially a construct, uniquely European and tragically popular in the United States. Baldwin wrote, "No one was white before he or she came to America. It took generations and a vast amount of coercion before this became a white country." The idea essentially is that white identity was created as a means to set it apart and thereby justify the subjugation of others. Every cultural identity in the United States then being influenced by this white standard, compared, contrasted, and vilified in relation to it. In other words, there is no white ethnicity. The Irish, Germans, Poles, Jews, etc., melted into one self-aggrandizing, homogenized concept known as white that to this day does not exist, yet provides a convenient, brainless means to separate human beings into different groups. Consider, as Baldwin wrote, there were no black people before the slave trade stole them and told them from here on out, that's what you are. This idea of identity as influenced by society and family is seeded throughout Go Tell It on the Mountain. The way they grate against what a person is capable of being, as well as the person one might wish to be, is also present. Whenever the story is told from John's perspective, there's a constant conflict between how he views himself, his future, and what not only society and family tell him he must be, but how the demands of his spiritual beliefs will influence his personality. That may be why, at one point, Baldwin said, "Mountain is the book that I had to write if I was ever going to write anything else." It seeded many notions that would be prevalent throughout his literary career. Perhaps the best summation of the novel is contained in a brief portion. Doing chores such as sweeping and dusting strikes John as a Sisyphean task. No matter what he does, there will be more dust tomorrow, more sins to confess, more racism to contend with, doomed to routines that will never end and never feel like real accomplishments. Yet failing to do them means eventually being buried in dust. The struggle is real, and we're all looking for a way to endure it.